So this is the last segment, the last lesson for this series, Worship by the Book, chapter 22 of our confession. And again, a brief overview. Worship by the book, we studied the regulative principle of worship. Worship according to God's Word. We do not add, we do not subtract, paragraph 1. We worship the one God through the one mediator, paragraph 2. The elements of worship are very important, and God has stated them. And we began by discussing prayer and how we must pray, the ministry of the Word, congregational singing, the sacraments of baptism and the Lord's Supper, and the occasional elements of humble fastings and thanksgivings that every now and then play a role in our life as Christians. We talked about the location of worship, which is neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem, but everywhere that we are through faith in Jesus Christ. And worship is to be done at home with our families, individually in our prayer closets or rooms or what have you, and solemnly and most importantly, publicly in corporate worship. Our faith is a public faith, and God is most glorified by our declaration when it is most public. And then, of course, last week we got into the day of worship, paragraph 7. And it was just great to hear some of your questions and discussions afterwards, and some questions throughout the week even, and that we are seeing the Sabbath as a gift from God. It's really how we should view it. We looked at the Sabbath as a creation ordinance, the Sabbath as a moral law that continues to bind us, and the fact that that man was not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath was made for man. And then, of course, we ended with looking at the Sabbath under the new covenant. God has the right to take the same substance, His moral law, and the requirement of 1 day out of 7, and because of the new creation, reform, if you will, that substance for His new covenant people, as seen in our observation of the first day of the week as our 1 day in 7. And we concluded with these words: Lord's Day observance is an area of concrete submission to Christ. I want to commend to you again this resource, the Lord's Day, its presuppositions, proofs, precedents, and practice. Free ebook. If you haven't already downloaded it, put it on your tablet, your phone, your laptop. The link is there. I really recommend it because it is a great modern treatment on the topic. Okay? So, before we get into our lesson on, that actually shouldn't be the day of worship. It should be honoring the Lord's Day. Let me change it right now. Why don't we have a quick discussion, say just 3 minutes amongst yourselves, between maybe 2 or 3 of you, or if you want to be there as a family. And this is not a question that you need to, come up, quote unquote, with an answer with. It's just a question that you can answer honestly. Aside from coming to church on Sundays, which is we spend the morning, the afternoon together, lunch together, I'm so blessed to spend lunch with everybody pretty much, every single week. It's so wonderful. We're together. But aside from that, we end in the afternoons, we come home, share with your seatmate or your group mate, what else do you do on the Lord's Day? That's it. What else do you do on the Lord's Day? You don't even need to raise your hand. Just shout it out. Give us some examples. What do you do on the Lord's Day?
Read Christian books.
Read Christian books.
Spend time with your family.
Good. Very good. Yes. What else?
Eating.
Eating? To be honest, you should eat every day, I think. But, okay. All right. Yes. Eating is very good. Yes. Some people have a special meal on the Lord's Day. Good for you. Yes.
Family worship.
Family worship. Very good. Planning for the week ahead. Sure. Relaxing as well. Yes. It is. We do have rest. Okay. Do you sleep? Maybe. In the evening, anticipating Ilya's questions. Okay. All right. These are all great answers. These are all things that we can do on the Lord's Day. And as we talk about honoring the Lord's Day, I want us to try to avoid this kind of rigid legalism that misses the mark, that misses the point of the Lord's Day as a day of rest and worship. As we discuss these things, what we do and what we don't do on the Lord's Day, I just want us to remember that even when it comes to those who strongly hold to this doctrine and the importance of it, many godly men and women will disagree to certain applications on how that is. And we'll see that. And we don't want to have to divide a church because people have slightly differing consciences. In fact, the problem passages that we have that we will be facing in just a moment might actually be instructive regarding the issue of conscience. So we should not look down upon some people who apply the doctrine of the Christian Sabbath, the Lord's Day, in a way that to us seems like, oh, come on, you don't need to do it that way. No reason to look down on them. And the same thing the other way around. No reason to look down on others that apply it differently than you. So why don't we read our last paragraph, paragraph 8, which teaches us how do we honor the Lord's Day. Ready? Together. The Sabbath is kept holy to the Lord by those who, after necessary preparation of their hearts and prior arranging of their common affairs, observe all day a holy rest from their own works, words, and thoughts about their worldly employment and recreations, and give themselves over to the public and private acts of worship for the whole time, and to carrying out duties of necessity and mercy. I want to suggest 2 more books with you guys if you are interested in more things. Okay, let's start with a short version. Remember the Lord's Day by Peter Masters, which is a booklet that is printed out of the Metropolitan Tabernacle. Peter Masters is the current pastor of that church, also known as Spurgeon's Church. I believe he's the 4th pastor after Spurgeon. Another larger book, slightly more technical book, is by one of my favorite theologians, Richard Barcellos, Getting the Garden Right. Now, what's cool about this is it brings you all the way back to creation in the garden. What does that have to do with Christians, and where are we going? He has a great part, a great section there that addresses these issues of the Lord's Day very, very well, in my opinion. If you don't remember Richard Barcellos, we had him for our online conference on hermeneutics. So I will quote both Masters and Barcellos a few times today. Here's some preliminary observations, some ideas that we pick up from last week, and some ideas that I just want us to have in our minds as we do our study. First of all, the 4th commandment is certainly not abrogated, that is canceled, anywhere in the New Testament. In fact, in just a moment, we will look at 3 problem passages. People call them so-called problem passages, and we will actually see they're not a problem at all. Secondly, James tells us that the 10 commandments are indivisible. We quoted this earlier. You cannot take them apart at a whim. You can't pick and choose. You can't say 9 commandments count, one of them don't anymore. Third, the Lord explicitly says the Sabbath was made for man and was not therefore solely for the unique kingdom of Israel, the unique theocracy. It's not only for them, it's for man. Fourth, the Savior announced that the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Some people struggle with the shift from Old Covenant to New Covenant. The truth is, God's moral commandments, His moral expectations haven't changed. But just like many of the commands, the positive commands in Scripture, God has taken the substance of that. Jesus, who is Lord of the Sabbath, has taken the substance of the Sabbath, and He has modeled to us a new way as He inaugurated the new creation and a new era of redemptive history. The heart of the matter remains the same. And He has the right to do that, to bring us to the first day of the week, for He is Lord over it. Fifth, John in Revelation 1:10, I don't know if you caught this, he's actually, I really believe, he's taking up the above statement of Christ, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. He's taking up that statement when he wrote the words, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. The only thing that Jesus called Himself Lord over in terms of a particular time or day anywhere in the Gospels is when He made the statement, I am Lord over the Sabbath. And John takes this language, theological language, and assumes the early Christians understood what was going on. I was in the Spirit. Early church testimony makes it clear that the Lord's Day being referred to here is the first day of the week. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. That's the day that Christ is talking about. He is Lord over this day. I am Lord over the Sabbath. John says, this is the day. He's Lord over this day. And 6, the New Testament specifically identifies the first day of the week as the day for Christian public worship. See it in Acts, 1 Corinthians. So the point is, Lord's Day observance, by the way, guys, is not an issue of Christian liberty. You might have thought this, you might have heard this. That this is more of an issue of Christian liberty. Since we're not under the Old Covenant, we're not under the law, we're under grace. When we worship God, when we have our public gatherings, it's really a matter of preference. It's Christian liberty. But the fact of the matter is, we are not at liberty to disobey God's law. That's not how the doctrine of Christian liberty works. The doctrine of Christian liberty applies especially in what we might call gray areas. It's very important for us to see how we can handle those. The doctrine of Christian liberty doesn't teach that you can disobey God's law. That's not liberty at all. You're enslaving yourself to disobedience. So let's look at those so-called problem passages. This was brought up last week, Romans 14, 3-6. Let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains. What kind of Old Covenant laws might that be referring to? Dietary laws, right? And let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It is therefore his own master that he stands or falls, and he will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make him stand. One person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. The one who observes the day observes it in honor of the Lord. The one who eats, this is key, eats in honor of the Lord, since he gives thanks to God, while the one who abstains in honor of the Lord and gives thanks to God. This idea of observing days and eating are not these, we need to understand context. Okay, we can't just take the language, it sounds familiar to me, I'm going to make it mean what I want it to mean. So specific context, Old Covenant, ceremonial, festive days, and dietary laws that were peculiar. When I say peculiar, by the way, I always use that word, don't I? I mean specific, all right? Specific to the people of Israel. We agree, that's specific to them. So, what's happening? Paul is urging that no pressure be brought on converted Jews who cannot bring themselves yet, at this point, because maybe they're still young Christians, to give up Jewish food laws and feast days. Look, if you want to eat kosher because you really believe that's the best, whether you have a previous religious background in it, that's why I think it's the best as of now, or real dietary convictions, it is not other people's decision to condemn you for that. And same thing with Jews who were still in the habit of observing feast days. As long as, of course, they did not think that these customs contributed to their salvation. Right? Now, on the other hand, you've got Galatians 4, 9-10. And if you know anything about Galatians, Judaizers and these people who were going back to the Mosaic Law, well, that was exactly their problem. They were looking to the Mosaic Law as a necessary means to be a true Christian, to be accepted by God. They were mixing law with gospel. And so we read in verses 9 and 10 of Galatians 4, "But now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world whose slaves you want to be once more? You observe days and months and seasons and years." So remember, the Old Covenant, that's what it's pointing to, the festal calendar. Days, months, seasons, and years. And take note that the Judaizers, during the time that Paul was writing to Galatia, what they had done is that they took something that was never meant to be a means to salvation in the first place, right? Mosaic law, it's not a means to salvation. You're not justified by works, by obedience to the law. They took something that was never meant to be that way as a means to righteousness and salvation, and they started making it a means to righteousness and to attain salvation. They were mixing it into the gospel. And that's why at the beginning of Galatians, what does Paul say? If anybody preaches any other gospel, Paul is saying these guys are preaching another gospel. A sort of weird, truncated gospel that was bent towards work salvation. So Paul is addressing the false teaching which says that you need to go back to the Mosaic law, particularly the ceremonial law, in order to be right with God. And we utterly reject that kind of perversion of the gospel. One last place, Colossians 2, 16 and 17. Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. A festival, a new moon, or a Sabbath. By the way, there were many Sabbaths under the ceremonial system. So take note, the shadow of the things to come are those specific ceremonial laws given to Israel. A Sabbath here refers to the many Old Covenant holy days and not the creation ordinance of rest, one day in 7. I hope you see that we're not being unfair here. We're not just simply letting our preconceived conclusions, presuppositions, if you will, drive our exegesis. I hope the lesson for us here is that a proper exegesis of these passages actually concludes that they are not addressing the fourth commandment at all. They're not addressing the fourth commandment as expressed in the new covenant observance of the Lord's Day at all. They have a specific context that had to do with making sure we understand the distinction between the old covenant and the new covenant, and that we don't get confused about how these things relate. And we give liberty to those people who believe in salvation by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone, that might still have some old Jewish practices, because that was their previous religion. They needed to give liberty. And if we are in the same position today, and somebody who was born and raised a Jew, still has Passover at his house or whatever, and those kinds of things, we're not just going to slam him immediately. We want them, of course, to slowly but surely begin to recognize that something better has come, and that Christ is our Passover lamb, and therefore we're thankful that you don't believe that it's salvific, but at the same time, we would like you to come to a point eventually where you recognize that these things are unnecessary. And then, of course, there's some people that are into not really any more religious celebrations of these things, but more of cultural celebrations of these things. And again, we try to be giving liberty to those people so long as we're clear these are not a means to salvation. So how about that statement we read as we began our lesson earlier, which says, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. As I promised, this will be brief. The verses that concern us read in Hebrews 4, 8-10, for if Joshua had given them rest, where did Joshua bring the people to? Into the promised land, the conquest. Is that the final rest though? No, because if Joshua had given them that rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So even after they entered the promised land, there was still a rest to come. There was still a rest that they were looking forward to. So then, now here is the issue. What does this mean? There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. Many different interpretations of that. There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. A few interpretive pointers. The word there, Sabbath rest, is unique. In fact, the author of Hebrews, the pastor who wrote the letter, who preached the sermon, might have coined this term in a specific theological context in order to convey something to the people. The Greek word here is sabbatismos, and it is not something that is used anywhere else in the New Testament. So take note, what is this passage really about in context? This passage teaches New Covenant Christians that the Old Covenant people's rest in Canaan was not the final rest of God's people. Do we agree? We agree. There is, therefore, a future eschatological rest which we are still awaiting. Yet even now, we have rested from our works and have rested or have entered into God's rest. Why? Because there is that already but not yet, right? Right now, new creation realities are already being experienced by us. The new heavens and the new earth have not yet come, but the benefits of the new creation are already communicated to us through Christ, who has inaugurated it through his death and resurrection. So there is this already, we're already rested right now. We've already entered into the rest by faith. We're resting from our works. We're resting in the finished work of Christ. We're at peace with God. We're at rest. But there is a not yet. There is a day later on. There is a time where that rest will not merely be a spiritual reality, because our bodies really are not at rest right now. there is toil, there is sin, there is affliction, there is all of these things. There will come a time where we will be in eternal rest, complete and perfect. Now, if you want to see a treatment on Hebrews 4, the whole context, a great exposition, and very important, a full discussion on what's LXX? Anybody know what that is? That is the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, which the New Testament authors often quote. If you want to see the background, you can trace the background of this back to the Septuagint. You can, once again, I believe you can order this. Okay, you can order this online. You can go to rbap.net, I think, .org, I forget, and get Barcelos' Getting the Garden Right. There's a huge discussion on that. One of the people that he quotes I find very helpful is Joseph Pipa. Okay, not John Piper, Joseph Pipa. All right, in his book, The Lord's Day, in page 117, he writes, and he is a good expositor, he writes about this verse, about the Sabbatismos, the Sabbath rest, Sabbath rest for the people of God. The uniqueness of the word suggests a deliberate theological purpose. He selects, or maybe even coins, invents, if you will, Sabbatismos, because in addition to referring to spiritual rest, it suggests as well an observance of that rest by a Sabbatismos, a Sabbath resting, a Sabbath keeping. Because the promised rest lies ahead for the new covenant people. They are to strive to enter the future rest. That is the command, the imperative in Hebrews 4. Yet as they do so, they anticipate it by continuing to keep the Sabbath. So the point is, God's divine act of creation, listen to this. I want us to think of His great acts. Creation, Israel's redemption from slavery in Egypt, and then His people's redemption from slavery to sin through the person and work of Christ. Look at how that affects the way people live. God's divine act of creation set the pattern to be kept, 6 days of work and 1 day rest. God's divine act of redeeming Israel from Egyptian slavery bound them to keep this pattern as His old covenant people. And God's divine act of saving His people from slavery to sin through Christ's death and resurrection binds us to honor what He calls His day, the Lord's Day, as His new covenant people. With all that said, what does it mean to honor the Lord's Day, therefore? Well, 4 things. We prepare to meet with the King. We rest from our earthly works. We give ourselves over to public and private worship, and we also perform works of necessity and mercy. And I hope that as we look at these applications, it would not, feel like you're in chains or you're being choked, like, oh, Lord's Day, this long, tiring day. All the cooking, the wives are like, the cooking, we have to cook the name, and all of these things. And yes, sometimes it's hard. It takes some getting used to if you are not really from a Lord's Day observance kind of background. But I hope that we would not see it as a begrudging duty, but a beautiful and gracious and refreshing delight, a day that warms our souls. And we need to balance it. We really do, because we can do lots of things as a church on the Lord's Day to the point that it really becomes the opposite of rest. It becomes very tiring. So we want to balance it. We believe we should spend the Lord's Day together in public worship, but we believe that we should have time as well for our private worship and for our spending time, like you said, spending time with our families and coming home. And it's not the wisest thing, because of our zeal for the Lord's Day then, to literally spend all of our time being very, mentally and physically active, stay up until 3 a.m., and, your work the next day gets leftovers, right? It's just like, oh, I am just hungover from the Lord's Day, and sorry, boss, just what a Lord's Day. So we need to rest and worship. The two come together. Preparing to meet with the King. Our confession states, the Sabbath is kept holy to the Lord. Why again do we use that? You're scared of that language. Why holy? Because when God claims something as His own, it is a holy ordinance. When He claims the supper as the Lord's Supper, it's a holy ordinance. When He claims the first day as the Lord's Day, it is a holy ordinance. And because it is, we are to keep it holy. And it is to be kept holy by those who, After necessary preparation of their hearts and prior arranging of their common affairs, that's our ordinary domestic affairs, do such and such. So, it is only common sense for a person to prepare for an important meeting. Do you agree? It's common sense. We want to prepare if we're going to meet somebody. And we take practical steps to make sure our things are ready. If you're going to go to a job interview, your resume is prepared. And we want to make sure that we have enough time and that we don't run late. So what does this look like for us practically in terms of preparation for the Lord's Day? Employees, if you have deadlines on Monday, make sure you handle it on Friday and Saturday. Students, if you have homework due on Monday, same goes for you. A lot of times, and yes, later we'll address the works of necessity. Again, we're not, begrudgingly obeying legalistically. There are issues that arise, and we go, oh, well, I'm sorry, but I have to handle this. I have to do that. This is something that's necessary for me. But what I want to make sure, I want to preempt this, is that we don't use that idea as an excuse to be lax in our preparations and to go, God is gracious anyway. God is gracious anyway. I forgot to do this. I forgot to prepare that. I forgot all these things. Grace, grace, grace. No, we want to prepare. So we ask ourselves, husbands, do you know what you'll be leading for family worship on Sunday night? You might say, yes, I do, because we're going through a series. Okay, good for you then. So you always know, because there's a series. How about food? Doesn't always have to be the wives, brethren. All right? Husbands as well, helping these things. Helping each other prepare, making sure that one is not overly stressed. This is where the complementary relationships between men and women, husbands and wives, really can shine. Or is it becoming imbalanced? Are we one of those husbands that say, wife, do all of these preparations so I can rest? Is it like that? Or is there a give and take? How about something very important such as prayer? Prayer. Come before God. No pointing fingers, all right? Prayer. Come before God on Saturday night. Come before Him privately. Come before Him with your family and ask Him, prepare your heart. That's something for me personally, as a pastor, as a husband, that I'm really praying over Isabella and my wife. Saturday night, I'm really asking the Lord, please, please help us. May tomorrow be a delight. May we not be distracted. May it really be a day that is delightful to us. So we prepare. That might look different for every household. And then, of course, the Lord's Day comes, and the reason why we're able to do what we're doing right now, clearly, is because we are resting from our earthly works. And rest has never been in the Bible synonymous with inactivity. Doesn't mean lazing around all day. Biblically, rest means to set aside the usual. So God created in 6 days. He didn't become inactive in the universe. In the seventh day, He is still the God that sustains the universe. But He rested from His great work of creation. We rest from our labors, from our earthly callings, from our earthly vocations. Again, this is common sense. If we did not have a day where we set aside our earthly vocations, goodbye church. Now, when's that going to happen? If we didn't have a day where we set aside our jobs, and this is the day, our confession notes. Observe all day a holy rest from their own works, words, and thoughts about their worldly employments and recreations. Now, I do not want to get into the observe all day a holy day. Does it begin Saturday night and end Sunday evening? Does it begin in the Sunday morning? And of course, the Jews had their practice and all of those things. And I think that's when we're getting to the point of missing the point. The point of the Lord's Day, negatively speaking, is to rest from our vocations that will look different for certain people. Positively, which is the next point, give ourselves over to worship. So God has already given us 6 days to labor. Isn't that a good thing? It's a good thing. For some people, that's already a lot. They're like, 6 days, right? So let's do what we can to lay aside our earthly vocations on His day. Masters, Peter, that is, in this book, helpfully writes, okay, this is where we get into the nitty-gritty. We don't want to split hairs, but we do want to get into the nitty-gritty. We want to think practically. So here, I'll give this a read, and you think about this. Let us be practical. You might run out of petrol on the Lord's Day, and you are at fault because you should have taken care to fill up the day before. Now, pause. And we go, what? What is wrong with that? Well, let's think. Do we want to be, let's say, late for church? No, we don't want to be. Therefore, is running out of petrol a hindrance that can come in your way that will possibly make you late for church? It could. So that's why we're thinking practically. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I should think about my petrol. Maybe I should think about my car. Saturday morning, I found out I have a flat tire. Oh, I'll take care of that on Sunday. Yeah, right. What do you mean you'll take care of that on Sunday? So we're thinking practically. So what could be the reasons that this happens to us, the petrol issue? And this is just an example. One, why should we take care of this? One, to avoid worldly distraction, obviously. Two, to avoid setting a bad example to others. Three, and you might disagree, but please give it a hear, to avoid supporting unnecessary employment on the day of rest and worship. Four, to honor and obey the Sabbath principle. However, merciful God, if you are in a tight corner and it is a matter of necessity and you would be marooned by not doing so, you'll just be stuck, then you may have to turn into the filling station on the Lord's Day. But you should not make a habit of it because it distracts us. It removes our focus. And I don't know about you, but have you ever been caught in that situation where you neglect this and you're on the road, and maybe for some of you, you live a little bit further out, and then you're on the road and you go, oh, wait a minute, my gas, my petrol, and you go, oh, I just missed the gas. Oh, I just missed the gas station again. When's the next one? And it's a stressful situation because, I don't know about you, but most of us can't really get around these days without a car. So we need to think about that, right? So this is a gracious way of putting it. You will not have committed a moral sin when you're in that situation. But you should never allow yourself to slide into disregard for God's day. Take note, many godly people would disagree with number 3, the idea of avoiding supporting unnecessary employment on the day of rest and worship. But I just want to suggest this to you guys. If we take the 4th commandment seriously, remember, it also says there that we should not employ others on His day so that we might graciously be an example of rest to the people as well. I don't know how you've applied this in your life, but when my dad became a serious Christian, and in the Philippines, their maids are common, they call them servants or whatever you want to call. Maids, people who basically stay at your home and do your service. Laundry and attend to food and all of these things. And they're compensated for that. In certain cultures, that's common. Philippines, that's common. My dad got convicted one day and basically said, wait a minute, I have the blessing of coming to church every Sunday while they're basically slaving over the household so that we would have a comfortable life. And it just hit my dad, and he said, you know what? No, they need to rest on the Lord's day, and they need to be able to come to church with us. And here's the thing, when we keep employing people, whether it be direct employment or even employment by implication, when we're not careful, we will basically promote a way of life that says, coming to Christ and therefore coming to church on Sundays, for people outside of my circle that I'm not really thinking about, for them, I think it's optional. So this is not a hard and fast rule. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that we need to be careful about these things. Here's a practical example. If we, make a habit of spending all afternoon in our favorite cafe, where the air conditioning is good and there's free Wi-Fi and everything like that, just imagine if one day we basically say, share the gospel to the barista. And eventually the barista gets saved. And then all of a sudden, we invite them to church. Oh, wait a minute. Church? But that's my barista on the Lord's Day. Who's going to serve my coffee on the Lord's Day? I have such a wonderful afternoon at that time. And all of a sudden, there's this weird conflict. And then when we actually are convicted and say, hey, you know what? You should take time off work on the Lord's Day. And they would look back and go, well, you obviously didn't care about that before. You obviously didn't care about that before. So again, practical implications that we need to think of. If we are in a spot where these things ends up happening, I'm not saying you're immediately committing a moral sin, but it is a sober reminder. It is something to think about. What kind of world and lifestyle are we promoting to the watching world, to those around us? I would love for those who are employed and working hard around us right now to see this example of God's people worshiping together and serving one another, loving and serving one another on the Lord's Day as this attractive thing that even makes them want to go, wow, I want to have Sundays off and be with those guys. What a joyful spiritual family they have. Food for thought. The specific application of the Lord's Day should not divide the church, what I just said, okay? But we should respect each other's consciences as we seek to apply the fourth commandment delightfully and not legalistically. I was convicted months ago wherein, my wife and I, it was probably ultimately my failure, failed to be prepared for the Lord's Day. And, I didn't think about food and all of these things. And we were still outdoors at the community center. And so I had to go get Uber Eats, right? And look, do with this illustration what you may. But when that guy kind of walked towards us and, had his food, had his mask on, and he was obviously there, and he was looking around, and I was just like, wow, there's something in me that feels that this is slightly hypocritical, that I am enjoying the delight of being able to worship with God's people, and my deep desire for an unbeliever is for them to also worship God with His people through the mediator Jesus Christ. But I'm actually commending him to do certain things that would actually keep him from eventually doing that. That was just something that really, really got me thinking, and needless to say, we will fail. We will fall short. We will call things necessities when they are not. We will be unprepared. And indeed, God is gracious. God is merciful. The question I really want to ask is not, who is the best Sabbath keeper in this church? No, that is not the issue. The question we want to ask is, do we want to continue increasing and personally, just on a personal level, getting better at honoring the Lord in this way? And therefore, making the worship experience of the church more conducive as well to that joyful experience. Common issues. Recreation. I want to say this, okay? Kicking a ball is never sinful in and of itself. You go out there, you see one of those funny bowls, and you throw it across, you're not going to be struck down by lightning, all right? This is not sinful in and of itself. But, is it the best use of the Lord's Day to take part in a Sunday footy league? I think not. Why? You're allowing the joys of this world, the worldly recreations, to remove your focus and attention from what we are to be doing on the Lord's Day. Parents, it would be the same for you. I know we all want our children to get into an instrument or a sport or whatever, but really, do we realize what the cost is for, pushing our child to have an afternoon footy league or piano recital or whatever? The great cost of removing your own child from the blessing of corporate worship on Sunday mornings or Bible study on Sunday afternoons. So it's not even an issue of, should I kick the ball? Should I throw the thing? It's not this crippling, weird thing, all right? No, it's not that at all. Seriously, just take a step back and go, really? Is that what I want to invest my Sundays on? Worldly recreations that actually take me away from my family to be able to bless my family at home through private worship and from the public assembly. When you put it that way, you get what I'm saying. You get what we're saying. It's that serious wisdom issue. Eating out. As mentioned above, we're not legalistic. There are times when a person might say they're providentially hindered from preparing their own food. I don't deny that could happen. That could definitely happen. You might have had the craziest week for all I know. You might have had a near-death experience last night. And I don't know what's going on in your life. And definitely, you have every right to say, I couldn't do it. My arms were chopped off. I couldn't do it. I couldn't prepare. All right. But even then, grow those arms back. We'd like to do better next time. The point is, preparing food for ourselves, for our families, and even sharing with the church is much more conducive to church life, isn't it? It's a joyful thing, right? When I see some of these kids bringing out the watermelons and, people bringing out fruit platters and things like that, I'm like, well, this is great. This is way better than going out there. Like, this is us serving each other. It's more conducive. It cultivates in-house fellowship, so therefore helps us honor God on His day. Okay, positively, we give ourselves over to public and private worship. And these people who honor the Lord's Day give themselves over to the public and private acts of worship for the whole time. Again, the whole time has to do with basically the time that we have. And this is really the heart of the Lord's Day. Why do we rest from our earthly vocations? Just so we can relax? Well, that's part of it. Sure, you can relax. But we rest from our earthly vocations because God has blessed us with this, corporate worship. And coming together with His people, publicly assembling. This is the day we finally gather as one body, where the means of grace are administered, where God communes with us in a unique way. But it is also a day that we should make use of for private worship in our homes. Again, husbands, I want to push you. I want to nudge you a little bit. What's family worship going to look like tonight? Something that you should be considering, thinking? Remember, we are to lay aside our earthly vocations. So what a unique opportunity to spend time in Scripture and prayer. For many of us, even after we come home from work, Monday to Friday, Monday to Saturday, whatever, we still have duties and responsibilities to our vocations, our jobs, and other things to fulfill. So I would encourage all of us, therefore, to make the Lord's Day that special day where not only are we given over to not gathering with our workmates, but gathering with our church mates, but a special day, I'm speaking specifically to husbands, where you can actually come home and be free to be with your wife, and be free to serve your children, and to be free to lead that Bible study, which probably for many people, they don't have as much time throughout the week. We desire to pursue daily family worship, but if you're not there yet, start with Lord's Day evening. At the very least, God has given us this blessed day. So why don't we do that? For my wife and I, for the past many months, the Sunday evening, especially since, Poppy's not able to have full-blown family worship yet, but every morning, I read her little Bible to her, we pray, we sing together. That's why she loves the doxology, because that's what we sing together every morning. But for Sunday evenings, for me and my wife, that is our sort of couples discipleship hour. Sunday evening, once we put Sabella to sleep and it's just me and her, that is when we come to the Bible together, pray together. We do that throughout the week, but for Sunday nights, it's specifically to address our marriage. It's specifically to address, and you don't need to do it this way, I'm just giving you a picture, a suggestion of how we do it, specifically to address our marriage. An open space where we come to the Word, see what it says. She can point out things about where I've fallen short. I can do the same. And we also give, of course, mutual encouragement as well. Since that is my neighbor, my closest neighbor. So we've spent all day at church learning how to love God and love our neighbor. I want to come home and I want to ask God for extra help to teach me this week to love my closest neighbor, my wife, in a special way. These are things that we can do to make the most out of the Lord's Day. Lastly, we of course we do perform works of necessity and mercy. Carrying out duties of necessity and mercy. Hear the words of the Lord of the Sabbath, Jesus Christ. He went on from there, Matthew 12, and entered their synagogue. And a man was there with a withered hand, and they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" It's just really a crazy question. So that they might accuse him. He said to them, "Which one of you who has a sheep, if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not take hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value is a man than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And the man stretched it out, and it was restored, healthy like the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him, how to destroy him. So let's never let the yeast of the Pharisees contaminate our joy in Lord's Day observance. They were the ones that corrupted it. And the point here is that duties of necessity and mercy, helping people, are not only lawful on the Sabbath, we are actually encouraged to do these good deeds. We should actually push each other. So we're in the middle of lunch fellowship. You get a call. My brother fell into a pit. Not only should we suggest, maybe you should help your brother. We should kick you. Go help your brother. Go help your brother. If you can come back, that would be great too. Come back for the afternoon study. But go help your brother. Go help your brother. You're on the way to church. You're rushing. I'm going to be late. Some horrible accident happens. There's nobody else around but you. Hello, get down from your car. Help those people. Help those people. So works of mercy, works of necessity. We are Christians. We are salt and light, even on our way to church. So, examples of people who are given over more commonly to these works. Doctors on call. But you know what's encouraging? I know lots of doctors, nurses, and stuff like that as well. They know that they've been called to this special vocation. People get sick on Sundays too. So we need doctors on Sundays, right? That is biblical. That is a work of mercy. But I also really appreciate the heart of many faithful Christian doctors and nurses that go, I am on call on Sundays. But my great prayer and hope and desire, of course, is to still maximize the Lord's Day, to do these duties of public and private worship, and to rest from these works as well, because I know I need this. And you say, okay, how about me? I'm an employee of a company that hires me on Sundays, and this is my current contract. Okay? You're not going to be excommunicated overnight, all right? We are merciful, we are gracious, we are patient. We will nudge you, we will be patient, and the bigger question is not, do you have it all figured out with your roster in the next year? That's not actually the bigger question. The bigger question is to ask yourself, I'm in the current situation that I'm in. Is my heart longing to set apart this day so I can be here regularly and be in my home worshiping with my family or whoever regularly? If your heart has that longing, then we'll work on the practical steps. There are people here that basically, had Sunday work. And in their opinion, it's not really a super duper a work of necessity. At first, it remained that way for a few weeks. We prayed. We took practical steps. We prayed as a church as well, because we know how important the Lord's Day is. What did the Lord do eventually? Bless the person with a new roster. For some people, it's not that simple. They go on. It takes some time. And again, I just like to commend and appreciate the people who have that heart and desire that goes, right now, I miss 2 Sundays a month because of my current contract at work, which I can't just let go of just like that, right? I have a family to feed, there's not that many jobs out, and so on. If you want to change jobs, that's another conversation. But a person like that who goes, but at the same time, every now and then, I'm nudging my boss. There could be a new schedule. I'm constantly praying about it. And, oh, hey, you know what, guys? I may work in Sunday mornings and I may miss the morning service, but I try to come on those days on the afternoon still. And you know what? When I come home, I really still try to maximize it with my family. That's the heart that we want. It's not just this ugly rigidity of slamming each other. It's that heart, that desire, that longing, that appreciation. I need this. I want this. This is good for me. Doctors on call, helping someone in an accident, driving people home, cooking, cleaning. We're not silly legalists. We carry on with our daily necessities and works of mercy. So here's the application. If we work hard throughout the week, then a day of ceasing from that work will truly be a day of rest. If you really are a hard worker, you're actually looking forward to that one day that you're going to set that aside. And if we are salt and light in the world throughout the week, then we will certainly look forward to a day of spiritual replenishment and re-energizing. I want to end by saying that we should be calling the Sabbath a delight. Now, in Isaiah 56, we read, "Blessed is the man who does this, and the Son of Man who holds it fast, who keeps the Sabbath, not profaning it, and keeps his hand from doing any evil." Now, Isaiah 55 in context, let me go to Peter Masters down there. The whole point of Isaiah 55 is both a reproof to the Jews and a prophecy for the future church of Christ. Believe it or not, Isaiah 58 is looking to the future New Covenant era, and it's talking about Sabbath keeping. in the New Covenant era. What does it say in chapter 58, verse 13? If you turn back your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, and the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, or seeking your own pleasure, or talking idly, then you shall take delight in the Lord, and I will make you ride on the heights of the earth. I will feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. What is this about? Master's comments. It focuses on the annual Day of Atonement. Read the chapter yourself later. The only specified time in the Old Testament for fasting. This day was always to be treated just as if it were a Sabbath day, and Isaiah shows how they should have kept this Sabbath. At the same time, the evangelical prophet shows what the New Testament Sabbath will be like. A day of unloosing spiritual burdens, verse 6, giving spiritual bread to the starving and garments of righteousness to the naked, verse 7, shedding light in spiritual glory, verse 8, interceding for the lost, verse 9, reaching out to afflicted souls, verse 10, seeking guidance from on high and building up the people, verses 11 and 12. If you don't know yet what you're doing tonight for your private or family worship, maybe you want to look back at this comment and take a look at Isaiah 58 and what it means to call the Sabbath a delight. So the point is, the Sabbath was made for man. It is to be a delight, not a begrudging duty. It is a gift, not a box to tick. It is a day of blessing, looking back at Christ's resurrection from the dead, which is inaugurated in the new creation, and looking forward to the consummation. In conclusion, hear the words of the Lord Jesus. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in His love. The fourth of these commandments is a special day to nourish our souls until Christ returns. These commandments, summarized as the 10 commandments, are the very commandments you and I have broken. We are Sabbath breakers. We are lawless people who have sinned against God in His law. And these commandments are the very commandments that Jesus Christ Himself fulfilled in our behalf. Jesus alone is the perfect Sabbath keeper. But now that He's done it on our behalf, He has called us out of love to abide in Him and to keep His commandments. Let us observe His day with eager anticipation of our final eternal rest. That ends our series on worship, religious worship, and the Sabbath day.